The smell of damp wool and old cedar smoke clings to your skin like a second layer of clothing, a permanent reminder of the long journey that has brought you to the edge of the world. You find yourself standing at the mouth of the Yukon River, where the water is a deep, churning grey, carrying with it the silt of 1,000 miles of untouched wilderness. The air here is thin and sharp, tasting of frost and distant pine needles, and as you draw a slow breath into your lungs, you feel the bite of the north settle deep in your chest. Your heavy boots sink slightly into the soft, muddy bank, and the weight of your pack, filled with everything you own in this life, presses firmly against your shoulders, a constant, grounding presence that reminds you of the gravity of your choice. Behind you lies the world of the late 19th century, a world of soot-stained brick factories, crowded tenement halls, and the relentless, rhythmic clatter of industrial machinery that never seems to sleep. But here, as you look out across the vast expanse of the Northern Territory, there is only the silence, a silence so profound and heavy that it seems to have a weight of its own, pressing down upon the valleys and the winding veins of the river. You are one of the thousands who have heard the whispered promise of the Golden Fleece, a siren song that travelled south through the telegraph wires and the ink of the morning papers, telling of a land where the earth itself is stitched with yellow fire. In the cities of the south, poverty is a slow, grinding ache, a cycle of labour that offers little more than the chance to wake up and work again the following day. But the Yukon offers a different kind of gamble, a chance to reclaim your life through the sheer strength of your back and the endurance of your spirit. You can feel the psychological pull of it even now, a magnetic tug toward the horizon that makes the cold seem secondary to the dream. It is a quiet desperation, mixed with a sudden, wild hope. The belief that just beneath the surface of the freezing mud lies the key to a future where you never have to answer to a foreman's whistle again. As you stand there watching the mist roll slowly off the water in long, ghostly ribbons, you realize that you are no longer a name in a ledger or a face in a crowd. Out here, you are simply a man against the elements, a solitary figure in a landscape that does not care if you succeed or if you vanish entirely into the brush. The scale of the wilderness is difficult to comprehend at first. The mountains rise up like sleeping giants, their peaks hidden in a permanent shroud of white, and the forests are so dense and dark that they seem to swallow the very light of the sun. There is a strange peace in this isolation, a stripping away of the noise of civilization, until all that remains is the sound of your own heartbeat and the slow, rhythmic lapping of the water against the shore. It is a moment of profound stillness, a chance to gather your thoughts before the true labour begins. And as you settle into this quiet space, perhaps preparing for your own rest, you are in the right place to let the world fall away. Here at the Slumber Archives, we bring you new history narrations every single day, crafted to guide you into a deep and peaceful sleep. If you find comfort in these journeys through time, please consider subscribing so you can join us for every new story, and a gentle like on the video helps others find their way to our campfire as well. Now, let us return to the bank of that cold, grey river, where the wind is beginning to pick up, carrying the scent of the coming winter. The transition from the world you knew to this place was not merely a matter of miles, but a shifting of your internal clock. In the city, time was measured by the ticking of clocks and the schedules of trains, but here, time is dictated by the height of the sun and the freezing of the streams. You adjust the strap of your pack, feeling the coarse texture of the canvas against your palm, and you begin to walk, your footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of moss and fallen needles. Every movement is deliberate and slow, for in the Yukon, haste is a luxury that leads to exhaustion. You notice the way the light catches the frost on the low-hanging branches, turning the world into a landscape of silver and glass, beautiful and treacherous all at once. The silence of the north is not a void, but a presence, a deep, resonant hum, that seems to vibrate through the soles of your boots. It is the sound of a land that has remained unchanged for thousands of years, indifferent to the sudden influx of men with shovels and dreams. You find yourself thinking of the gold not as a currency, but as a physical part of this earth, something heavy and ancient that has been waiting in the dark for an eternity. The thought of it warms you more than your heavy wool coat ever could. You imagine the weight of a single nugget in your hand, its cold, smooth surface and the way it would catch the light of a flickering candle in the dark of a cabin. This is the lure that has brought you to the mouth of the Yukon, the promise of something tangible and real in a world that often feels fleeting. As the afternoon begins to wane, the shadows stretch long and thin across the riverbank, and the temperature starts its slow, inevitable descent. You find a spot to rest for a moment, sitting on a smooth, water-worn stone that feels like ice beneath you, even through your thick trousers. You take out a piece of hardtack, the dry, flavourless bread of the trail, and chew it slowly, savouring the simple act of nourishment. Your hands are already beginning to chap from the dry air, the skin turning red and rough, but you barely notice the discomfort. Your mind is already miles upstream, imagining the creeks and the gulches where the gold is said to hide. You think of the men who came before you, the ones who mapped these waters and left their names on the land, and you wonder if they felt this same mixture of awe and trepidation as they looked out over the vast, white silence. The Yukon River is a wide, moving road that leads into the heart of the unknown, and as you watch a piece of driftwood float past, bobbing gently in the current, you realize that you are now part of that flow. There is no turning back now. The ships that brought you have long since departed, leaving you and your fellow travelers to find your own way through the labyrinth of the north. You feel a sense of camaraderie with the strangers you see scattered along the shore, men with the same haunted, hopeful look in their eyes, all of them bound together by this shared pursuit of the golden fleece. You don't speak much. Words seem small in the face of such a landscape, but a simple nod or a shared glance is enough to acknowledge the bond of the trail. As the first stars begin to prick through the deepening blue of the sky, you prepare to make camp for the night. The process is slow and methodical. You gather dry wood, feeling the brittle snap of the branches in your hands, and you build a small fire that huddles against the cold. The flames are a bright, flickering orange against the gathering dark, and as the heat begins to radiate outward, you feel the tension in your shoulders begin to melt away. You wrap yourself in your heavy blankets, the scent of wood smoke and old wool enveloping you like a cocoon. The ground beneath you is hard and unforgiving, but your body is tired enough that it feels like a luxury. You lie there for a long time, staring up at the stars, which seem larger and brighter here than they ever did back home. They are cold, distant fires, watching over the wilderness with a silent, steady gaze. The river continues its endless murmur in the background, a low, rhythmic sound that lulls your mind into a state of quiet contemplation. You think of the miles you have travelled and the miles that still lie ahead, and for the first time in a long time, you feel a sense of purpose that goes beyond mere survival. You are a seeker, a pioneer on the edge of a new frontier, and though the journey will be hard and the cold will be relentless, you are exactly where you chose to be. The fire crackles softly, a spark leaping up into the night air before vanishing into the dark, and you let your eyes drift shut, the vast silence of the Yukon finally claiming your senses as you drift into a deep, dreamless sleep. The rhythm of your breath is the only clock that matters now, a steady, frosted plume that rises and vanishes against the backdrop of the white peaks. You wake before the light has fully claimed the valley, the transition from sleep to movement marked by the stiff protest of your muscles and the biting clarity of the mountain air. Your boots, heavy and caked with the frozen mud of yesterday's climb, feel like leaden weights as you lace them tight, pulling the leather cords until they bite into your ankles. Every movement is deliberate, a slow dance of conservation, because today you face the Chilkoot Pass, a jagged stairway of ice and stone that demands everything you have to give. You stand before the base of what the locals and the weary travellers ahead of you call the Golden Staircase. It is not made of gold, of course, but of steps hacked into the blue-white ice by those who came before, 1,500 steps leading straight into the clouds. As you look up, the scale of it settles into your bones, a vertical line of humanity, thousands of men and women reduced to tiny dark specks against the blinding snow, inching upward in a silent, rhythmic crawl. There is no room for haste here. To rush is to stumble, and to stumble is to lose your place in the line that stretches back for miles. You adjust the straps of your pack, feeling the familiar heavy bite of the canvas against your shoulders. This load is merely 60 pounds, a fraction of the ton of supplies you are required to move, but as you begin the climb, it feels as though the mountain itself is pulling at your heels. The Northwest Mounted Police stand at the summit like silent sentinels, and their presence dictates the very shape of your struggle. They have decreed that no stampeder may enter the Yukon without a full year's worth of provisions, 2,000 pounds of flour, beans, bacon, tools, and gear, to ensure that the wilderness does not swallow you whole before the first thaw. Because no pack animal can survive this incline, you are the beast of burden. You realize with a slow, meditative clarity that you will have to climb this pass 40 times, carrying piece after piece of your life upward, caching it in the snow and descending again to the bottom. It is a cycle of labor that strips away the ego, leaving only the raw physical reality of the climb. Your world narrows to the heels of the man in front of you, and the precise placement of your own toes in the icy notch of the step. The air grows thinner as you ascend, and with each breath, the cold seeps deeper into your lungs, a sharp metallic taste that reminds you of the height. You hear the rhythmic crunch of snow and the heavy, synchronized heaving of 100 chests. There is a strange, unspoken camaraderie in this shared suffering. You are all competitors, yes, chasing the same glimmering dream hidden in the creek beds of the north. But in this moment, on this slope, you are a single organism. When a man collapses to his knees, the line pauses without complaint, a collective sigh of wind and wool, until he finds his strength again. You catch the eye of a stranger beside you, his beard a mask of white frost, and in that brief glance there is an entire conversation, a recognition of the madness and the majesty of what you are attempting together. The weight on your back seems to shift, the flour sacks and the crates of dried beef becoming a part of your own anatomy. Your hamstrings burn with a dull, glowing heat that radiates through your wool trousers, the only warmth you have against the wind that howls through the notch of the pass. You focus on the textures around you to keep your mind from wandering to the exhaustion. The rough grain of the wooden crate pressing into your spine, the frayed edges of your mittens, the way the light refracts through the ice until the world looks like it is carved from diamond. You find a cadence, a slow-motion march where the mind drifts away from the body, hovering somewhere above the trail, watching the long dark thread of seekers winding their way toward the sky. As you reach the halfway point of this particular trip, you pull off the trail into a turnout, a small ledge carved into the snow where climbers can rest without breaking the flow of the line. You lean back against the icy wall, letting the mountain take the weight of your pack for a few precious minutes. From here, the view is staggering. Below you, the camp at DA looks like a scattering of pine needles on a white sheet, and the trail you have just conquered is a dark ribbon of discarded effort. You see the sheer determination of the thousands behind you, a river of ambition flowing uphill against the laws of gravity and common sense. It is a quiet realization that you are part of a moment in history that will be whispered about for a century, a fever that has gripped the hearts of clerks, sailors, and farmers alike, turning them into mountain climbers by sheer force of will. The competition is silent, but ever present. You watch a man pass by with a load that looks impossible, his back bent nearly double, his face a mask of grim resolve. You feel a flicker of that same fire in your own chest, the need to prove that you are strong enough, that you have the constitution to endure what the Yukon demands. But the mountain has a way of softening that edge, replacing vanity with a profound respect for the elements. You realize that the gold is not just in the ground. It is in the endurance itself, in the way your body adapts to the cold, and the way your mind finds peace in the midst of such monumental toil. The golden staircase is a crucible, burning away everything that isn't essential, leaving you with nothing but your breath, your strength, and the slow, steady climb toward the summit. Eventually the slope begins to level out, and the wind, which had been a constant companion, turns into a fierce, biting gale that signals the top of the pass. You reach the crest, and there, amidst the swirling spindrift, are the Mounties, checking manifests and weighing the future of every man who crosses. You drop your load at your designated cache, the heavy thud of the sacks hitting the frozen ground providing a sense of immense relief. Your shoulders rise, freed from the straps, and for a moment you feel light enough to float away into the grey sky. You stand at the gateway to the interior, looking out over the frozen lakes that lead toward the Klondike, a vast, white silence that feels both welcoming and terrifying. But the day is not over. You turn back toward the edge of the slope, looking down at the path you just ascended. Now comes the descent, a sliding, jarring trip back to the bottom to retrieve the next 60 pounds of your ton of gear. You tuck your coat around you and begin the slide, the wind rushing past your ears, the world blurring into a streak of white and grey. It is a brief moment of levity, a reward for the hours of climbing, before you reach the bottom and prepare to do it all again. The cycle continues, the sun moving in a low arc across the horizon, casting long blue shadows across the Chilkoot. You are tired, more tired than you have ever been in your life, but as you shoulder the next load, you find that the weight feels just a little bit lighter, your feet a little more sure on the ice. You are becoming a part of the mountain, a slow and steady force moving toward a golden horizon. The sound of the rushing water reaches you long before you see the river's edge, a low guttural vibration that thrums through the soles of your worn leather boots. You have finally left the frozen incline of the Chilkoot behind, but the relief is short-lived, replaced by the damp, heavy scent of pine needles and the spray of the headwaters. Ahead of you lies Lake Bennett, a vast expanse of slate-grey water, and the realization that the journey is no longer a matter of vertical endurance, but of craftsmanship and courage. You drop your pack onto the soft, mossy earth, your shoulders screaming as the blood rushes back into your stiffened muscles. Your hands, calloused and mapped with small, healing scars from the mountain, reach for the handle of your felling axe. To move forward, you must build. There are no ferries waiting here, no established passage for a man with a ton of gear. There is only the timber of the northern woods and the strength of your own arms. You find a stand of spruce, their trunks straight and sturdy, and you begin the slow, rhythmic work of felling. The bite of the steel into the wood is a clean, sharp sound that echoes across the water, a steady heartbeat in the silence of the wilderness. As the trees fall, you begin the process of stripping the bark, the sticky, sweet-smelling resin clinging to your fingers and matting the hair on your forearms. You are building a raft, a makeshift vessel that must carry your entire life, your flour, your beans, your tools, and your hope down the winding spine of the Yukon. You lash the logs together with heavy manila rope, your fingers numbing as you pull the knots tight, ensuring that the wood sits deep and stable in the water. It is a primitive thing, rough-hewn and heavy, but as you push it into the shallows and feel it bob under your weight, it feels like a triumph. The water of the lake is deceptively calm, a mirror for the towering peaks that surround you, but as you begin to row, the current of the river beyond begins to exert its pull. You drift north, the landscape sliding by in a slow, panoramic blur of green and grey. The air is cooler here, moving over the surface of the water and carrying the mist into your clothes until your wool coat feels heavy and damp against your skin. You find a rhythm with the long sweeps of your oars, the wood groaning against the oarlocks, a steady, hypnotic sound that lulls you into a state of weary meditation. But the meditation is broken by a change in the river's voice. The low hum you heard miles back has sharpened into a roar, a chaotic symphony of crashing water and grinding stone. You are approaching Miles Canyon. The river, once wide and accommodating, suddenly narrows, squeezed into a basalt gorge only 80 feet wide. The water here is not merely moving, it is frantic, a churning mass of white foam and deep emerald green swells. As your raft enters the mouth of the canyon, the world seems to accelerate. The walls of dark rock rise up on either side, slick with spray and ancient moss, closing in until you feel small and insignificant against the power of the torrent. You grip the steering sweep with everything you have, your knuckles white, your boots sliding on the wet logs of the deck. The raft plunges into the first set of standing waves, and the freezing water of the Yukon washes over your knees, soaking through your trousers and stealing the breath from your lungs. It is a terrifying, visceral dance. You are no longer the master of your direction. You are merely negotiating with the river, trying to keep the bow pointed downstream, trying to avoid the jagged teeth of the rocks that wait just beneath the surface. Then comes the White Horse Rapids. They call them this because the manes of the waves look like the white hair of galloping horses, wild and untamable. The water here is a labyrinth of cross-currents and whirlpools. You feel the raft shudder as it hits a rock, the sound of wood splintering sharp as a gunshot. For a moment, time seems to stretch and slow down. You see your crate of dried beef slide toward the edge, the rope fraying under the strain. You reach for it, but the river is faster. With a sickening splash, a third of your winter supplies vanishes into the white froth, swallowed by the river in an instant. The raft spins, caught in a powerful eddy, and for a heartbeat, you are staring back upstream, the world revolving in a dizzying circle of spray and stone. You heave against the sweep, your muscles burning, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. With a final desperate shove, you catch the main current again, and the raft shoots forward through the final gauntlet of waves and out into the widening, calmer waters below the rapids. Silence returns, or at least the relative silence of the moving river. You are drenched to the bone, shivering violently as the adrenaline begins to ebb away. You look back at the white water, now a safe distance behind you, and then you look down at the empty space on your raft where your supplies once sat. The loss is devastating. In this country, calories are as valuable as gold, and you have just watched months of sustenance disappear into the deep. A lesser man might pull to the shore and weep, or turn back toward the coast. But as you wring the icy water from your cap, a strange, quiet resilience begins to take hold. You are still afloat. Your tools are still lashed to the center of the raft. Your gold pan, the most important thing you own, is tucked safely inside your bedroll. You realize that the river has taken its toll, a tax for passage, but it has not taken your spirit. You begin to row again, your movements slow and deliberate. The sun remains low, casting that perpetual golden hour light across the banks, where the fireweed is just beginning to bloom in bursts of vibrant purple. You find yourself noticing the way the light catches the ripples on the water, the way a bald eagle circles high above the canyon, indifferent to the struggles of the men below. The hunger will come later, and the cold is a constant companion. But for now, there is the simple, rhythmic task of moving forward. As the evening settles in, you steer the raft toward a sandy spit of land, the wood grating softly against the silt. Your legs are shaky as you step onto solid ground, the earth feeling strange and unmoving beneath your feet. You gather driftwood, your fingers fumbling with the matches until a small flickering flame takes hold. The smell of wood smoke rises, mingling with the scent of the damp earth and the river. You hang your wet clothes on a low branch, watching the steam rise from the wool in the firelight. You sit by the fire, wrapped in a dry blanket, and listen to the river. It is a different sound now, no longer a threat but a path. You think of the miles you have covered and the miles that still remain, the vast uncharted stretches of the Yukon that will lead you to the Klondike. You have survived the mountain, and you have survived the rapids. You are leaner now, your face weathered by the wind and marked by the sun, but there is a hardness in your eyes that wasn't there when you stepped off the boat in Skagway. The resilience required for this journey is not a sudden burst of bravery, but a slow accumulation of endurance. It is the ability to lose half your gear and still decide to boil a pot of coffee. It is the ability to feel the bite of the frost and the ache of your joints and still find beauty in the way the moonlight reflects off the glacial silt. You lean back against a smooth riverstone, the warmth of the fire finally reaching your core. The stars begin to emerge, piercing the indigo sky with a clarity you have never seen in the crowded cities of the south. They are cold and distant, but they are steady. Tomorrow you will assess what is left. You will repack the raft, tightening the ropes, learning from the mistakes of the canyon. You will find a way to make your remaining flour last a little longer, perhaps by trading work at the next camp or by fishing the deep pools of the river. The goal hasn't changed. The gold is still there, tucked into the frozen creek beds, waiting for a man who refused to turn back. As you drift towards sleep, the sound of the river remains in your ears, a constant flowing reminder that you are moving, always moving, toward the heart of the north. The scent of wet earth is different here than anywhere else on the globe. It is a heavy, ancient smell, redolent of moss that has not seen the sun in 10,000 years, and the sharp, metallic tang of iron-rich water. As you stand upon the banks of the Bonanza Creek, the weight of your heavy wool coat pulls at your shoulders, damp with the mist that clings to the valley floor like a ghost. You have arrived at the epicenter of the fever, a place where the geography of the earth is being rewritten by the hands of desperate men. And yet, as you look down at the stakes driven into the muck, everything feels strangely quiet. The legalities of the Yukon mining district are as rigid as the permafrost beneath your boots, a necessary structure to prevent the chaos of the trail from bleeding into the business of the gold. You remember the hushed conversations around the campfires about the discovery claim, that singular point on the creek where George Carmack and Skookum Jim first pulled the yellow metal from the water. Everything is measured from that one spot, a central pulse from which the rest of the world radiates outward. Claims are numbered sequentially, one above discovery, two below, marking a man's place in the hierarchy of luck and timing. To hold a claim is to hold a legal promise, a 500-foot slice of the valley floor that belongs to you and you alone, provided you have paid your $10 to the gold commissioner and can defend the borders of your kingdom against the encroaching mud. You walk the perimeter of your own plot, feeling the squelch of the gravel beneath your heavy soles. The physical reality of Bonanza and its sister, the El Dorado, is a stark contrast to the glittering dreams that brought you over the Chilkoot Pass. These are not wide, majestic rivers, but narrow, winding ribbons of slate-colored water, choked by willow thickets and the debris of 1,000 years of spring floods. The valley walls rise steeply on either side, cloaked in stunted black spruce that seem to lean inward, watching the progress of the shovels. In the height of summer, the sun barely manages to crest these ridges long enough to warm the back of your neck before the shadows return, long and blue and cold. As you stand in the center of your claim, the isolation begins to settle over you, a blanket of silence that even the distant ring of a pickaxe cannot truly pierce. You are surrounded by other men, hundreds of them. perhaps thousands, stretched out along the miles of the creek, and yet your 500 feet of earth feels like a private island in a sea of grey. There is a profound sense of solitude in the labour. You look at the mounds of tailings, the heaps of discarded rock and sand that represent weeks of backbreaking work, and you realise that you are an architect of the underground. Your world has narrowed to the width of a trench and the depth of the bedrock. The mud is everywhere. It coats your hands until the skin is stained a deep, earthy brown. It splatters your trousers and finds its way into the creases of your eyes. It is a thick, viscous medium that demands your constant attention, clinging to the gold and hiding it from view. The El Dorado Creek, just a short trek over the ridge, is said to be even richer, a place where the gold lies in pockets so thick it looks like cheese in a sandwich. You hear the rumours as you pause to wipe the sweat from your brow with a damp sleeve. The men there are whispered to be pulling out thousands of dollars in a single afternoon, but for you, on this stretch of the bonanza, the rewards are measured in grains and dust. You find a strange comfort in the repetition of the work. The rhythmic sound of the shovel biting into the frozen muck, the splash of the water as you rinse a pan, the slow, circular motion that coaxes the lighter sand away to reveal the heavy residue at the bottom. It is a meditative process, a way to quiet the mind and focus entirely on the physical sensation of the present moment. The landscape around you is a patchwork of industry and desolation. Where once there were ancient forests, there are now only stumps and the raw, red scars of the earth where the moss has been stripped away. The creek itself has been diverted and dammed, forced into wooden flumes and sluice boxes as men attempt to harness the power of the water to do their bidding. You see the smoke rising from a dozen different cabins, small, low-slung structures built of unpeeled logs and sod, huddling against the hillsides like hibernating animals. Inside those cabins, men are sleeping, dreaming of the mother lode, while outside, the relentless work of the Yukon continues. You feel the ache in your lower back, a dull, constant thrum that reminds you of the hours spent bent over the water. The cold of the creek has seeped through your leather boots, numbing your toes until they feel like heavy stones. And yet, there is a satisfaction in the ownership of this small patch of ground. In a world that often feels vast and indifferent, you have carved out a space that is yours. You know every rock, every bend in the stream, every patch of stubborn permafrost that refuses to yield to the sun. You are learning the language of the creek, the way the water murmurs over the riffles and the way the gravel settles in the eddies. As the light begins to fail, turning the grey mud into a deep charcoal violet, you stand for a moment and look up at the sky. The stars are beginning to prick through the twilight, cold and distant and incredibly bright. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the sharp, clean smell of the coming frost. You think about the journey that brought you here, the thousands of miles, the mountain passes, the rapids of the river, and you realize that this small, muddy plot of land is the destination you were seeking all along. It is not just a place to find gold. It is a place to test the limits of your own endurance, to see what remains when everything else is stripped away. You begin to gather your tools, the heavy iron head of the pick cold against your palm. Tomorrow, the work will begin again at dawn. You will climb back into the trench, you will fight the mud and the ice, and you will search for the glimmer of yellow that promises a different kind of life. But for now, the valley is quiet. The sounds of the other miners are fading as they retreat to their cabins and their meagre meals of beans and sourdough. You are alone with the creek, a solitary figure in a landscape of giants, finding peace in the simple, repetitive reality of the search. The gold is there, hidden deep beneath the layers of time and frozen earth, and you are content to wait, to work, and to listen to the slow, steady heartbeat of the north. The mud under your fingernails, the grit in your hair, the stiffness in your joints. These are the marks of the Klondike, the badges of a man who has staked his claim in the wilderness. You move toward your shelter, the flickering light of a small fire reflecting in the dark water of the creek. The world of cities and paved streets feels like a dream from another lifetime, a pale shadow compared to the raw, visceral beauty of this frozen valley. Here, life is reduced to its most basic elements: warmth, food, and the hope of what lies at the bottom of the next pan. And as you prepare to rest, the silence of the Yukon settles over you, a deep and profound stillness that promises a sleep as heavy and enduring as the mountains themselves. The scent of freshly sawn spruce is a sharp, clean contrast to the damp smell of the earth and the sulphurous bite of the wood smoke clinging to your clothes. It is a smell of industry and hope, a scent that marks the transition from the solitary labor of the pan to the collective rhythm of the sluice. You run your calloused thumb along the edge of a rough-hewn plank, feeling the splinters and the grain of the wood. This is the skeleton of your ambition, a series of long wooden troughs that will soon become the lungs of your operation, breathing in the gravel of the creek and exhaling the heavy, golden dust you crave. Construction is a slow, methodical process that demands a level of precision your aching body finds difficult to muster. You have spent days felling the trees, hauling the logs through the thick underbrush, and hand-sawing them into boards. Every inch of these 12-foot boxes must be crafted with care, for the Yukon is a harsh judge of shoddy workmanship. You fit the planks together to form a long, narrow channel, a wooden artery that will soon pulse with the icy blood of the mountain streams. But the most vital part of this anatomy lies at the bottom of the trough. These are the riffles, the wooden slats or blocks fastened across the floor of the box. To the uninitiated, they look like nothing more than a series of small hurdles, but to you, they are the secret keepers, the silent guardians that catch the gold as it tries to slip away in the current. As you hammer the final riffle into place, you can almost feel the physics of the valley beginning to align in your favor. The Sluice Box is a masterpiece of simple gravity, a machine that uses the very weight of the earth to sort its treasures. You understand now that gold is a stubborn, heavy element, nearly 7 times heavier than the sand and quartz that surround it. When you finally divert the creek into the head of your sluice, the water becomes a powerful, rushing force, a liquid broom sweeping the dross downstream. The lighter rocks and the common silt are caught in the turbulence and carried away, tumbling over the riffles and back into the valley floor. But the gold is different. Because of its immense density, it sinks rapidly, dropping out of the main current and nestling into the quiet, protected pockets behind those wooden slats. It huddles there, safe from the rushing water, waiting for you to come and claim it. The sound of the water hitting the wood is a constant, rhythmic drumming that fills your ears throughout the long daylight hours. It is a hypnotic sound, a steady percussion that masks the groan of your joints and the protesting muscles in your back. But you cannot afford to drift off into a trance. The Sluice Box is a temperamental creature, and it requires your constant, unwavering attention. You watch the water flow with the intensity of a hawk, looking for any change in the ripple or the foam. If the water runs too fast, it will scour the riffles clean, washing your gold right out the end of the box and back into the depths of the creek. If it runs too slow, the riffles will become choked with heavy black sand and gravel, leaving no room for the gold to settle. You are constantly adjusting the pitch of the troughs, propping them up with stones or digging them deeper into the muck, seeking that perfect, elusive equilibrium where the water is strong enough to clean the gravel but gentle enough to leave the treasure behind. Even as the water does its work, the environment is working against the very wood you have labored to shape. You notice a slight bead of moisture seeping through a seam in the third box, a tiny leak that threatens to undermine the entire structure.
The wood of the Yukon is never truly seasoned. It is green and stubborn, prone to warping under the relentless cycle of soaking and drying. In the heat of the afternoon, the planks might twist and pull away from their nails, creating gaps that would swallow your gold before it ever reached the riffles. You spend your brief moments of rest patrolling the length of the line, hammer in hand, driving home loose nails and stuffing gaps with moss or scraps of burlap. It is a never-ending battle against the elements, a struggle to keep this fragile wooden bridge intact against the weight of the water and the shifting of the permafrost beneath your feet.
You find yourself leaning over the side of the box, your hands submerged in the freezing flow as you clear away a large cobble that has become wedged against a riffle. The cold is a sudden, sharp ache that travels up your arms and settles in your chest, but you don't pull away. You watch as a plume of dark sediment swirls around your fingers, caught in the miniature whirlpools created by the wooden slats. Somewhere down there, hidden beneath the layer of heavy black sand, the first flakes are beginning to accumulate. You can't see them yet. The water is too murky and the light too dim, but you can feel the potential of it. It is a weight in the mind, a silent promise that every hour of sawing, every nail driven into the spruce, and every moment spent standing knee-deep in the slush is leading you toward that final, glorious cleanup. The maintenance of the sluice becomes a meditation of sorts. You begin to recognize the unique voice of each section of the trough. The head box has a deep, guttural roar where the water first crashes in, while the lower sections have a softer, more musical babble as the current thins out. You learn the personality of the wood, how it swells and sighs, how it groans under the weight of a particularly heavy shovelful of pay dirt. You are no longer just a man moving earth. You are the caretaker of a complex hydraulic system, a steward of gravity and flow. The ache in your shoulders becomes a dull, familiar hum, a background noise to the grand symphony of the creek. As the day begins to stretch its long, violet shadows across the camp, you take one last walk along the length of your creation. The spruce planks have darkened with the water, turning a deep, rich amber that glows in the fading light. There is a profound satisfaction in seeing the water move exactly as you intended, watching it dance over the riffles in a perfect, controlled chaos. You know that tonight, while you sleep, the wood will continue to shift and the seams will continue to strain against the cold. You know that tomorrow will bring more leaks to plug and more warped boards to coax back into place. But for now, the anatomy of the sluice is holding. The physics are working. Down in the dark, quiet spaces behind the wood, the gold is settling, grain by grain, as the Yukon slowly yields its secrets to the patient, the steady, and the tired. You turn away from the rushing water, the sound of the sluice following you like a heartbeat as you find your way back toward the warmth of the fire, leaving the wooden troughs to their silent, heavy work in the gathering cold. The iron edge of the shovel bites into the earth with a sound that is both sharp and dull, a rhythmic scraping against frozen gravel that becomes the only music you know. You do not think of the gold as jewelry or currency anymore. You think of it as weight. To find the color, you must first move the mountain, one rhythmic, agonizing heaving of the arms at a time. The pay dirt sits in heavy, slumped mounds at the edge of your claim, a mixture of ancient silt, jagged pebbles, and the thick grey muck that seems to want to hold on to everything it touches. As you drive the blade downward, the vibration travels up the wooden handle, through your calloused palms, and settles deep into the marrow of your elbows. It is a slow, steady conversation between your muscles and the permafrost, a dialogue that began at dawn and will not conclude until the light fails entirely. Your shovel is an extension of your own frame, a heavy forged tool that feels lighter in the morning and grows exponentially more burdensome as the hours stretch toward the afternoon. There is a specific geometry to the work, a way of bracing your lead foot against the lip of the hole while your back hinges at an angle that would be unbearable if you stop to think about it. But you do not stop. To stop is to let the damp cold of the Yukon mud seep through your wool trousers and find the heat of your skin. Instead, you maintain the momentum. You lift, you pivot, and you toss the earth into the sluice box with a wet, heavy thud. The repetitive motion creates a strange, hypnotic trance where the world narrows down to the space of 3 square feet and the steady, mechanical rise and fall of your shoulders. The muck is a living thing, or so it feels in the dim light of the northern day. It is thick and stubborn, clinging to the spade with a suction that requires a sharp flick of the wrists to break. Every 3 or 4 shovelfuls, you feel the strain in your lower back, a localized heat that burns against the ambient freezing air. It is a dull, throbbing ache that keeps time with your breathing. You learn to breathe with the shovel, inhaling as you bend, holding that breath as you take the weight, and exhaling in a long, misty cloud as the dirt leaves the blade. The steam from your lungs mingles with the faint, earthy scent of disturbed minerals and the smell of wet cedar from the sluice. It is a sensory envelope that isolates you from the vast, empty wilderness surrounding your claim. As the hours pass, your shoulders begin to feel like they are made of cooling lead. The dampness from the creek has long since worked its way into the seams of your coat, and the friction of the heavy wool against your moving joints creates a slow, stinging irritation. Yet there is a certain peace in the exhaustion. In the removal of the muck, there is a clarity of purpose that the world outside the Klondike rarely offers. You are not thinking of the future or the past. You are only thinking of the next 3 inches of gravel. The pay is hidden somewhere in that dark, wet mass, and your labor is the only key that can unlock it. You watch the water wash over the dirt you've just deposited, seeing the lighter sands whisked away by the current, leaving only the promise of what is heavy and true. The cold is a constant companion, but it is the dampness that truly tests your resolve. Your gloves are perpetually soaked, the leather stiffening as it freezes and then softening again as the heat of your hands works against it. You can feel the grit of the sand inside your boots, a fine, abrasive reminder of the ground you are dismantling. Your body becomes a machine of leverage and endurance. You learn to use your knees to take the brunt of the lift, to twist your torso just enough to save the small of your back and to find the sweet spot of the shovel's balance point. It is a primitive, exhausting dance, a slow-motion struggle against the inertia of the earth itself. Sometimes you pause for just a moment, leaning your forehead against the cool, smooth wood of the shovel handle. The silence of the valley rushes back in the moment you stop moving, a silence so profound it feels like a physical weight on your ears. You can hear the distant cracks of the glacier moving miles away, or the faint rustle of a bird in the stunted pines. But mostly you hear the blood drumming in your own temples. Your heart is a steady, thumping engine, keeping you warm in a land that would prefer you were cold. After a few seconds, the chill begins to bite again, and the stillness becomes a threat rather than a comfort. And so you push the blade back into the muck, feeling the familiar resistance, the familiar weight, and the familiar, back-breaking rhythm that defines your existence in this frozen kingdom. The pile of tailings grows behind you, a monument to your sweat and the hours you have given to the creek. Each stone in that pile was once in your hands, felt through the thickness of your gloves, and judged by its weight. There is a meditative quality to this manual labor that those who have never dug for their lives can never truly understand. The mind wanders to strange, quiet places, to memories of warm kitchens, the sound of a piano in a distant parlor, or the taste of a fresh apple. These thoughts float through your consciousness like the silt in the sluice, eventually washing away to leave only the heavy golden core of your determination. You are a creature of the earth now, bound to the gravel and the water, carving a living out of the very bones of the world. As the afternoon light turns to a deep, bruised purple against the snow-capped peaks, the ache in your shoulders reaches a plateau. It no longer worsens. It simply is. It becomes a part of your geography, as much a feature of the landscape as the bending river or the grey sky. You find a second wind, or perhaps a third, fueled by the knowledge that the day's work is nearing its end. The shovel feels different now, more like a crutch than a tool. You move with a mechanical precision that requires no conscious thought, your body having memorized the exact arc required to clear the rim of the box. The muck is thinner here, closer to the bedrock where the best gold usually hides, and that hope provides a tiny, flickering spark of energy that keeps your arms moving when your mind tells them to stop. You look down at your hands, even through the gloves, and you can see the tremors of fatigue, but you also see the progress. You have moved tons of earth today. You have stripped away the layers of time to reach the ancient channel of the creek. The exhaustion is a heavy cloak, but it is also a shield. It numbs the worries of the world beyond the mountains and focuses everything into the simple, honest reality of the shovel and the dirt. As you prepare to throw the final load of the day, you take a long, slow breath of the biting air, feeling it sear your lungs with a cold purity. The rhythmic scraping finally ceases, and the sudden absence of the sound is like a curtain falling. You stand tall, or as tall as your stiffened spine will allow, and look at the sluice one last time, watching the water continue its tireless work long after you have laid your tools aside. Deep beneath your feet, the earth is not merely cold, it is ancient, a stubborn witness to thousands of years of frost that has turned the soil into something resembling iron-plated stone. You feel this resistance in the very marrow of your bones as you stand at the lip of your shaft, looking down into the dark, narrow throat of the pit you have spent weeks hollowed out of the frozen muck. To reach the gold, you must first break the grip of the permafrost, a task that requires more than just the strength of your arms or the edge of your pick. It requires the patient, suffocating heat of the flame. You begin the evening's labor by gathering wood, the dry, brittle spruce limbs snapping with a sharp report that echoes through the valley. Your movements are slow, deliberate as you lower the kindling into the hole. There is a specific rhythm to this ritual, a quiet choreography of fire and shadow. You arrange the logs at the bottom of the shaft, stacking them with the care of an architect building a monument. This is the burn, the only way to coax the earth into surrendering its secrets. As you strike the match, the small flame flickers against the damp, biting air, catching the dry bark and beginning its slow, hungry climb. You watch the first wisps of smoke curl upward, a pale grey ghost rising from the depths, and you know that for the next several hours the fire will be the only living thing in that dark hole. As the fire takes hold, the air around the shaft becomes a thick, heavy soup of wood smoke and thawing earth. You step back, wiping a smudge of soot from your forehead, but there is no escaping the scent. It clings to your heavy wool coat, weaves itself into the fibers of your beard, and settles deep into your pores. It is a smell that defines your existence here, the scent of scorched timber and the damp, musty odor of soil that hasn't seen the light of the sun since the last ice age. You sit on a nearby stump, wrapped in the quietude of the evening, and listen to the muffled roar of the fire below. It is a subterranean growl, the sound of heat battling the infinite cold of the north. The danger of this work is a silent companion, one that sits beside you in the flickering orange light. As the wood burns in the confined space of the pit, it consumes the oxygen, replacing it with a lethal, invisible weight. Carbon monoxide is the miner's quietest enemy, a heavy vapor that lingers in the low places, waiting for the unwary. You have heard the stories of men who descended too quickly after a burn, their lungs filling with the sweet, deadly air before they even realized they were in peril. And so, you wait. You give the fire time to die down, and you give the smoke time to clear, though it never truly leaves the shaft. Even hours later, When you finally descend to clear the loosened muck, the air remains thick and acrid, stinging your eyes and making every breath feel like a heavy, labored chore. You learn to breathe shallowly, to move with a measured economy of motion, always keeping one ear tuned to the subtle signals of your own body, the slight lightheadedness, the sudden pounding of the heart, that warn you when the air has turned foul. The progress you make is agonizingly slow, a reality that tests the limits of your patience more than the strength of your back. After a full night of burning, after the wood has turned to ash and the heat has radiated into the frozen walls, you might find that the earth has softened by only a few inches. Perhaps 6 if you are lucky. 6 inches of progress for a day of back-breaking preparation and hours of breathing smoke. You descend the ladder, your boots squelching in the newly formed mud at the bottom. The ground here is a strange consistency, a slurry of grit and meltwater that clings to your shovel like wet cement. You begin the process of mucking out, hoisting the heavy buckets of thawed earth to the surface, one by one. Each bucket represents a victory over the frost, a tiny step closer to the bedrock where the heavy yellow dust might be hiding. Your world narrows to the diameter of this hole. The walls are dark, slick with moisture as the frost melts and weeps down the sides. You can feel the cold radiating from the unburned sections of the earth, a deep, penetrating chill that seems to push against the warmth of your own skin. It is a strange sensation, to be surrounded by frozen ground while the air around you is still warm from the embers. You work in this liminal space between the fire and the ice, your shovel scraping against the boundary where the heat has failed to penetrate. When the blade hits the frost again, the sound changes from a dull thud to a sharp metallic ring. That ring is the signal that your work for this shift is done. The earth has closed its doors once more. You climb back to the surface, your muscles trembling with a fatigue that feels as old as the mountains around you. The sun, if it has risen at all, is a pale, weak disk behind a veil of grey clouds. You look down at your hands, stained black with soot and brown with the ancient mud of the Klondike. There is a profound, quiet humility in this labour. You are a man pitted against a continent of ice, armed with nothing but fire and a will to endure. You realize that you are not so much conquering the land as you are negotiating with it, pleading for every inch of depth with the offering of your breath and your sweat. As you begin to prepare the next burn, stacking the wood for the coming night, you find yourself lost in the rhythm of the task. The repetition becomes a form of meditation, a way to quiet the anxieties of the mind. You do not think about the thousands of feet of earth that still lie between you and the gold. You do not think about the months of winter that remain. You think only of the wood, the flame, and the next 6 inches of earth. There is a strange peace in this simplicity, a stripping away of everything but the most essential elements of survival and hope. The fire crackles again, a small defiant spark in the vast frozen wilderness, and you settle in to watch the smoke rise, a thin ribbon of grey connecting your world to the cold, indifferent sky above. The heat begins to seep into the ground once more, and you close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the fire brush against your face, a fleeting comfort before the long dark hours of the muck return. You are a part of the landscape now, as much as the spruce trees and the frozen creeks, a tiny point of warmth in a land defined by the cold, and in the silence of the valley, the only sound is the soft rhythmic breathing of the fire, eating away at the heart of the frost. The iron pan in your hands is a heavy, cold weight, its rim worn smooth by thousands of rotations against the grit of the creek bed. It is a simple tool, a shallow basin of cold rolled steel that has become an extension of your own weary arms, yet it demands a precision that your numbing fingers struggle to provide. You step away from the dying embers of the fire and back toward the edge of the water, where the current of the creek has been partially diverted into a small, quiet pool. The transition from the warmth of the flames to the biting air of the bank is sharp, a physical blow that settles deep in your chest, but you do not hesitate. You crouch low, the heavy wool of your trousers stretching tight across your knees, and reach down toward the dark, swirling surface of the stream. The water is a translucent, icy grey, carrying with it the breath of the glaciers and the deep, ancient frost of the mountains. As you dip the pan into the flow, the cold strikes your wrists like a band of iron, a searing sensation that quickly fades into a dull, throbbing ache. You have learned to ignore the way the skin of your knuckles turns a waxy, translucent white, and how the tips of your fingers lose their ability to feel the texture of the metal. There is a thin crust of ice beginning to form along the quiet edges of the pool, delicate needles of frost that shatter with a tiny glass-like tinkling as the pan breaks through. You scoop a generous portion of the gravel and sand from the bottom, the weight of the water and stone pulling at your shoulders, and begin the slow, rhythmic labor of the wash. This is the swirl, a motion that must be as steady as the ticking of a clock and as fluid as the river itself. You hold the pan slightly tilted away from your body, submerged just enough so that the water can stir the contents without washing them away entirely. With a gentle circular motion of your wrists, you begin to agitate the mixture. The larger pebbles dance and tumble, clattering against the iron sides with a sound like rolling dice, while the lighter sand begins to rise, suspended in the turbulent water. You are looking for a specific harmony of movement, a balance where the centrifugal force carries the lighter debris over the lip of the pan, leaving the heavier materials to settle into the deep, narrow groove at the bottom. The process is hypnotic, a repetitive dance that draws your focus down into the small, swirling world within the steel rim. You lose track of the wind whistling through the stunted pines and the distant sound of other men working their claims further down the gulch. There is only the weight of the pan, the resistance of the water, and the slow, methodical thinning of the load. As the larger stones are cleared away by hand, tossed back into the creek with a splash that feels unnaturally loud in the frozen silence, you are left with a slurry of fine silt and black magnetic sand. This sand is the gatekeeper of your fortune, a dense, dark sediment that clings to the bottom of the pan, hiding whatever secrets the earth has chosen to yield today. Your hands are now so cold that they feel swollen and clumsy, yet you must be even more delicate now. A single hurried movement, a tilt that is just a fraction too steep, and hours of digging could be lost back to the current. You lift the pan slightly out of the water, leaving just a thin film of liquid to lubricate the remaining grit. You begin to shake it with a short, sharp vibration, a jigging motion that encourages the heaviest particles to find their way to the very bottom. The water turns murky, clouded by the dust of crushed rock, and you carefully pour it off, watching the dark line of the black sand as it shifts and settles. It is in this moment, as the last of the grey silt washes away, that the world seems to hold its breath. You tilt the pan back toward the light, catching the pale filtered glow of the northern sun as it hangs low on the horizon. And there, nestled against the dark curve of the iron, you see it. It is not a roar or a shout, but a whisper of light, the first colour of the day. A tiny gleaming speck of yellow, no larger than a grain of salt, sits stubbornly amidst the black sand. It does not shimmer like the mica or the fool's gold that has broken so many hearts. It has a heavy, buttery luster that remains constant even as you shift the pan. It is a solid, honest light, a fragment of the sun trapped in the cold mud of the Klondike. The sight of it sends a strange, localized warmth through your chest, a brief spark of adrenaline that makes the frostbite on your fingers feel momentarily distant. You continue the wash with renewed focus, your movements becoming even more cautious, more reverent. As the water clears more of the sand away, another speck appears, and then a small jagged flake, perhaps the size of a fingernail. It is a meagre find by the standards of the legends you heard in the saloons of Skagway, but here, in the solitude of the creek, it is a profound victory. You have reached into the frozen heart of the wilderness and pulled out something of value, a tiny piece of the earth's hidden treasury that has waited 10,000 years for your hands to find it. You reach for your snuffer bottle, a small leather pouch, or a glass vial tucked securely inside your heavy coat, and use a dampened fingertip to carefully lift the gold from the pan. The metal feels strangely heavy for its size, a dense reality that grounds you in the midst of the vast, shifting landscape. As you drop the flakes into the container, the faint clink they make against the glass is the most beautiful sound you have ever heard. A tiny note of music that justifies the ache in your back and the biting cold in your bones. You take a moment to simply stand there, the empty pan hanging at your side, watching the way the light plays across the surface of the creek. The risk of frostbite is a constant companion, a silent predator that waits for you to lose yourself in the thrill of the find. You notice that you can no longer feel the bridge of your nose, and the skin around your fingernails has begun to crack from the constant immersion in the alkaline water. You rub your hands together, the friction of the rough wool gloves bringing a painful, stinging sensation as the blood tries to return to your extremities. It is a slow, agonizing process, the screaming barfies, as some call it, when the warmth returns to frozen flesh, but it is a pain you welcome. It means you are still alive, still feeling, still capable of continuing the work. You look down at the pan once more, the dark iron now wet and gleaming, reflecting the vast, pale sky above. The black sand still clings to the edges, a reminder of the thousands of pans you have yet to wash, the tons of earth that must be moved and sifted before the winter truly closes its fist around the valley. But for now, the small weight of the gold in your pocket is enough. It is a tether to a world beyond the frost, a promise of warm rooms, hot meals, and a life that does not require the constant battle against the ice. You turn back toward your small camp, your boots crunching through the frozen mud, the rhythm of your stride matching the slow, steady pulse of the land itself. The panning is a trial of endurance, a test of patience that strips a man down to his very essence, leaving only the drive to find what lies beneath the surface. And as the shadows begin to lengthen, stretching long and blue across the snow, you know that tomorrow you will return to the water, to the swirl, and to the quiet, golden promise hidden in the dark. The rhythm of the creek has a way of settling into your bones, a constant, low-frequency hum that vibrates through the soles of your boots and into the marrow of your legs. It is the sound of gravity at work, the relentless pull of water over wood and stone, and for 6 days of the week you are a servant to that sound. But as the 7th day approaches, the air in the camp shifts. There is a quiet electricity that cuts through the fog of exhaustion, a sharpening of the senses that makes the morning coffee taste a little stronger and the bite of the wind feel a little less cruel. It is the day of the clean-up, the moment when the heavy, moss-covered sluice boxes finally surrender the secrets they have been guarding since Monday morning. You stand at the head of the long wooden trough, your hands resting on the rough-hewn edges. The wood is slick with algae and grit, worn smooth in places by the passage of thousands of gallons of silty water. For days you have shoveled the pay dirt, that dark, promising gravel from the ancient stream bed into the rushing flow at the top. You have watched it tumble and churn, the lighter sands washed away by the current, while the heavier materials, the black sands and the elusive yellow flakes, sank deep into the riffles. These riffles, the wooden slats or stones placed across the bottom of the box, act as tiny dams, creating miniature eddies where the gold can find a place to rest. Now the water is slowly diverted, the roar fading to a trickle, then a drip, until the bottom of the sluice lies exposed to the pale, thin light of the Klondike sky. The silence that follows is heavy. broken only by the distant call of a raven or the crackle of a nearby fire, you kneel in the mud, the dampness seeping through the knees of your heavy wool trousers, but you hardly feel the cold. Your focus is entirely on the dark concentrate trapped behind the slats. It looks like nothing more than wet, black sand at first glance, magnetite and hematite, heavy and stubborn, but as you begin to carefully brush the material into a shallow bucket, you see the first glint. A tiny spark of sunlight trapped in a grain of metal that has travelled through eons of geological time just to reach this wooden box. The process of the clean-up is one of extreme delicacy, a stark contrast to the back-breaking labour of the week. You use a small, stiff brush to sweep every crevice, every crack in the wood, ensuring that not a single grain of dust is left behind. Your fingers, calloused and cracked from the alkaline water, move with the precision of a jeweller. This is the culmination of every shovelful, every hour spent shivering in the rain, every night spent dreaming of a strike that would change everything. You gather the black sand into a pan, and it is here that the true alchemy begins. From a small, heavy flask, you carefully pour a few drops of liquid mercury into the pan. It rolls across the black sand like a silver bead of water, shimmering and strange in the half-light. This is the quicksilver, the miner's silent partner. As you gently swirl the pan, the mercury seeks out the gold, drawing the tiny flakes into itself, absorbing them into a dull, heavy amalgam. It is a slow, hypnotic dance. You watch the silver bead grow larger and more sluggish as it feasts on the gold dust hidden within the grit. There is something profoundly satisfying about seeing the scattered wealth of the earth gathered together in this one shimmering mass. It feels solid. It feels real. As you work, your mind wanders to the possibilities. If the weight in the pan is heavy, if the amalgam is thick and rich, it means another week of survival is guaranteed. It means better supplies, perhaps a tin of peaches, or a fresh side of bacon from the trading post. It means a few more inches of progress toward that distant goal of a comfortable life back south, far away from the permafrost and the endless white silence. But if the pan feels light, if the mercury remains thin and bright, having found little to cling to, the disappointment is a physical weight in your chest, a coldness that no hearth fire can truly warm. You have seen men stare at an empty pan for hours, their eyes hollow, the realization sinking in that the ground they have bled over for 7 days is barren. But today, as you squeeze the excess mercury through a piece of fine chamois leather, leaving behind the ball of gold-rich amalgam, the weight is promising. You feel the heft of it in the palm of your hand, a dense, stubborn lump of potential. You carry it to the small iron retort, or perhaps just a hollowed-out potato if you are working a smaller operation, to heat it and drive off the mercury, leaving the pure, porous gold behind. The smell of the wood smoke mixes with the metallic tang of the work, a scent that defines this era, this place. The final tally is a ritual of its own. You bring the gold, now a collection of dull yellow flakes and perhaps a few small, smooth nuggets, to the small brass scales in your cabin. The cabin is dim, lit by a single tallow candle that casts long, flickering shadows against the log walls. The only sound is the rhythmic ticking of a pocket watch and the soft clink of the weights as you balance the scale. You watch the needle hover, swaying back and forth until it finally settles. There is a moment of profound stillness as you read the result. In this tiny, cramped space surrounded by the smell of damp wool and old pine, the value of your life's work is measured in ounces and grains. Whether it is a triumph that brings a rare smile to your weathered face or a modest sum that merely keeps the hunger at bay for another week, the feeling of the gold in your hand is the same. It is cold, yet it represents the heat of ambition. It is small, yet it fills the entire horizon of your world. You lean back against the rough bench, your muscles finally allowed to go slack. The clean-up is finished. The riffles are empty. The sluice box stands ready for the coming Monday, and for a few brief hours, the relentless pressure of the hunt is lifted. You look at the small pile of gold on the scale, its colour unnatural against the dark wood of the table. It is the heart of the Klondike, a piece of the earth's ancient fire, won through sweat and endurance. Outside, the wind begins to pick up, whistling through the gaps in the doorframe, a reminder that the wild land is always waiting. But here, in the golden glow of the candle, you find a moment of peace. The tally is done, the week is accounted for, and as you prepare to bank the fire and crawl into your furs, the weight of the gold stays with you, a quiet, heavy reassurance in the pocket of your soul. The transition from the frantic energy of the sluice to the quiet contemplation of the cabin is a bridge you cross every week, a necessary shift for the mind to remain intact. You find yourself staring into the embers of the stove, the orange light playing across the jars of flour and the tinned goods on your shelf. Each item represents a price paid in gravel and cold water. You think of the men further down the creek, some who hit the motherlode and are even now celebrating with expensive whiskey and loud songs, and others who sit in the dark, wondering if the next bend in the river holds anything at all. In the Klondike, luck is a fickle neighbour, but the clean-up is the one moment of absolute truth. It does not lie. It does not offer excuses. It simply shows you what you have earned. You run a thumb over a small nugget you kept aside, feeling its irregular shape the way it was tumbled by ancient currents long before man ever set foot on this continent. It feels like a piece of history, a fragment of the world's deep memory. And as your eyes grow heavy, the sound of the creek outside begins to fade, replaced by the soft, rhythmic breathing of a man who has done his work and found his reward, however large or small it may be. The gold is safe. The fire is low, and for now, the Klondike is silent. The biting chill of the Yukon night does not merely rest against the walls of your shelter. It presses inward, a heavy, invisible weight that seeks out every hairline fracture in the wood and every thin spot in the canvas. You pull the heavy wool blankets up to your chin, but the warmth you manage to build during the evening is a fragile thing, already beginning to slip away into the shadows of the rafters. Your home is a modest structure, a hybrid of a log shack and a canvas tent that leans tiredly against the slope of the valley. The lower half is built of unpeeled spruce logs, notched roughly at the corners and chinked with frozen moss and mud that you clawed from the earth before the deep freeze took hold. Above these logs, a heavy canvas roof is stretched tight, though it sags under the weight of the accumulating snow. It is a cramped, dim space, lit only by the dying amber glow of the small sheet-iron stove that sits in the centre of the dirt floor. This stove, often called a Yukon stove, is the true heart of your existence. It is a temperamental companion, demanding constant attention and a steady diet of split wood. As you lie there, drifting on the edge of sleep, your ears are tuned to its every sound. The sharp pop of a pitch pocket, the low whistle of the draft, and the eventual, dreaded silence that signals the fire is dying down. The air inside the shack is thick and layered with the history of your toil. There is the sharp, medicinal scent of fresh spruce boughs that you have laid down as a makeshift mattress, their needles prickling through the thin ticking of your bedroll. Overpowering the evergreen, however, is the heavy, cloying smell of damp wool. Your socks, heavy trousers and coat are draped over a line near the stove, steaming faintly as the moisture from the day's work evaporates into the cramped room. It is a scent of salt, wet sheep's hair, and the faint metallic tang of the creek water that has soaked into every fibre of your clothing. You have grown accustomed to it, just as you have grown accustomed to the layer of soot that seems to coat every surface, including the skin of your own hands. Maintaining the fire through the night is a ritual of survival that interrupts your rest every few hours. You find yourself waking up not because of a noise, but because of the absence of heat. The tip of your nose grows numb, and the moisture of your breath begins to crystallize on the edge of the blanket. With a low groan, you swing your legs out from under the covers, the sudden shock of the freezing air biting at your skin. Your feet find the cold, uneven ground, and you stumble toward the stove in the darkness. You can hear your bunkmate, a man whose name you barely knew 6 months ago, but whose every snore and sigh is now as familiar as your own heartbeat, shifting in his sleep on the other side of the room. There is no privacy here, only the shared necessity of staying alive. You fumble for a piece of kindling, your fingers stiff and clumsy, and shove it into the belly of the stove. A few sparks dance upward, illuminating the small space for a fleeting second. You see the stacked crates that serve as your table, the rusted tin plates, and the heavy iron-gold pan leaning against the wall like a silent sentinel. The fire catches, a small flicker growing into a steady flame, and the stove begins to tick and groan as the metal expands. You crawl back into your bed, the spruce boughs crunching beneath you, waiting for that first wave of radiant heat to reach your shivering frame. The sounds of the camp at night are never truly silent. Even in the dead of winter, the Klondike is a restless place. Through the thin canvas of the roof, you hear the muffled thud of a neighbour chopping wood by lantern light, the rhythmic swing of the ass echoing off the frozen hillsides. Somewhere in the distance, a sled dog howls. A long, mournful sound that is quickly joined by a dozen others, a chorus of wild, lonely voices that seems to vibrate through the very ground. You hear the wind moaning as it funnels through the gulches, rattling the stovepipe and making the canvas roof snap like a sail in a gale. There is a strange intimacy in these sounds. You are surrounded by hundreds of other men, all tucked into similar shacks and tents, all staring at the same dark rafters, all dreaming of the same yellow metal. You can hear the low murmur of voices from the tent next door, the words indistinguishable but the tone weary and hushed. Someone coughs, a deep rattling sound that lingers in the cold air, and you wonder briefly how many of you will see the spring thaw. But these thoughts are heavy, and your body is far too tired to carry them for long. As the stove begins to throw off a steady warmth once more, the tension leaves your shoulders. You focus on the small comforts. The way the wool blanket feels slightly softer now that it has warmed. The way the smell of the spruce boughs reminds you of a forest in the sun rather than a frozen wasteland. You think of the gold you found today, that small, heavy weight in your pocket that represents a future you haven't yet dared to fully imagine. It is a strange life lived in the narrow margin between the freezing dark and the glowing stove, but as the heat finally coaxes you back into a deep, dreamless slumber, it is enough. The darkness of the shack feels less like a void and more like a cocoon. The rough-hewn logs, though they leak the warmth, provide a sturdy boundary against the vast, indifferent wilderness outside. You are tucked away in a tiny pocket of humanity, a single spark of life in a landscape of ice and stone. The rhythmic breathing of your companion becomes a steady metronome, lulling you further down into the quiet. The world of the sluice box, the pickaxe, and the frozen muck feels 1,000 miles away, though it waits for you just beyond the door. For now, there is only the warmth of the fire, the scent of the wood smoke, and the slow, steady pulse of the Yukon night. As the hours drift toward morning, the frost on the inside of the canvas roof grows thicker, glittering like diamond dust in the faint, ambient light of the stars filtering through the weave. The stove settles into a low, contented hum. You shift slightly, finding a pocket of warmth that hasn't yet dissipated, and let your mind wander to the quiet forests of your home, far to the south. You imagine the smell of damp earth after a rain, the sound of leaves rustling in a warm breeze, and the luxury of a bed that doesn't smell of wet wool and wood smoke. These memories are like ghosts, haunting the edges of your consciousness, providing a soft contrast to the harsh reality of the Klondike. But even those memories begin to fade as the weight of your physical exhaustion takes full command. Your muscles, which have spent the day straining against the frozen earth, finally go limp. The ache in your lower back becomes a dull, distant throb, easily ignored in the sanctuary of sleep. You are no longer a miner, a dreamer, or a seeker of fortune. You are simply a man, resting in the heart of a cold world, held safe by a few logs, a sheet of canvas, and the fading heat of a small iron stove. The silence of the snow begins to settle over everything, muffling the world, and as the last glow of the embers dies away, you are finally, peacefully adrift. The sharp metallic tang of a tin cup against your teeth is often the first sensation of the morning, a reminder that even in this wilderness your body requires a fuel that the frozen earth cannot provide. Hunger in the Klondike is not a simple craving, but a persistent, hollow companion that follows you from the sluice box to the blankets, a quiet gnawing that shapes every thought and every movement of your day. You reach for the heavy ceramic crock tucked near the warmth of the stove, the vessel that holds your most precious possession, the sourdough starter. To a man in the goldfields, this bubbling, fermented slurry of flour and water is more than just food. It is a living thing, a link to the life you left behind, and the only insurance you have against the crushing weight of the Arctic winter. You have learned to sleep with this crock wrapped in your spare wool shirt, sometimes even bringing it into your bedrolls on the coldest nights, because if the starter freezes and the wild yeast dies, a part of your survival dies with it. The smell of the cabin as the stove heats up is a thick tapestry of wood smoke, damp wool, and the sour, acidic aroma of that rising dough. You watch the bubbles pop slowly on the surface of the pale tan mixture, a miniature landscape of craters that signals it is ready to be transformed into heavy, dense flapjacks. There is no milk here, no fresh butter, and certainly no eggs. You mix the starter with a bit of flour and a pinch of baking soda, watching it foam and hiss before pouring it onto the blackened surface of your cast-iron skillet. The sizzle is a comforting sound, a rhythmic pulse in the morning silence. As the edges of the cake curl and brown in the rendered fat of salt pork, you feel a brief, flickering sense of domesticity, a moment where the harshness of the Yukon is held at bay by the simple act of cooking. Beside the sourdough, the staples of your existence sit in heavy canvas sacks, stacked like cordwood against the wall. Beans and bacon, bacon and beans. You have eaten this combination so many times that the very thought of it has become a grey, indistinct blur in your mind. The bacon is rarely the crisp, streaky delicacy of a city breakfast. It is salt pork, heavy with brine and fat, yellowed at the edges and demanding a long soak to make it even remotely palatable. You slice it thin, the knife dragging through the cold grease, and watch it curl in the pan until it swims in its own oil. This fat is your lifeline. In a world where the temperature drops to 40 below zero, your body burns through calories with a terrifying speed, and you find yourself craving the slick, heavy coating of grease on your tongue, knowing it is the only thing keeping the inner cold from claiming you. The beans, usually the small white navy variety, require a patience that tests the soul of even the most stoic miner. They must be soaked for hours, then simmered over the low heat of the stove until they yield their toughness. Sometimes, as you sit by the flickering light of a tallow candle, you find yourself staring at a single bean on your spoon, marveling at the fact that this hard, pebble-like seed has travelled thousands of miles across mountain passes and down churning rivers just to sustain you for another few hours at the wind-swept claim. There is a psychological weight to this monotony. You begin to dream of things you once took for granted, the crunch of a fresh apple, the snap of a green bean, or the cool, watery sweetness of a slice of melon. In your sleep, you are often wandering through orchards or sitting at a table laden with colourful salads, only to wake to the dim, brown reality of your cabin and the smell of boiling legumes. This lack of variety is not merely a matter of boredom, it is a physical threat that lingers in the back of your mind like a shadow. You have seen the signs in others, the men whose gums begin to soften and bleed, whose old scars unexpectedly reopen, and whose legs turn dark with the bruising of scurvy. It is a quiet, creeping sickness, a thief that steals the strength from your limbs and the hope from your heart. Because you know the danger, you have become resourceful, even desperate, in your attempts to find the vitamins your body craves. You have heard the old-timers talk of the indigenous people and their wisdom, and so you find yourself gathering the tips of spruce needles, steeping them in boiling water to create a bitter, resinous tea. It tastes of turpentine and the forest floor, a harsh, astringent liquid that makes your throat constrict, but you swallow it down religiously, imagining the green life of the tree flowing into your own tired veins. Sometimes a shipment of evaporated vegetables reaches the nearby camp, shriveled, grey flakes of potatoes, onions and carrots that look more like sawdust than food. You treat these like gold dust, adding a handful to your bean pot and watching as they swell into pale, flavourless ghosts of their former selves. They offer a different texture, a slight crunch that breaks the soft mush of the beans, and for a moment, if you close your eyes, the scent of the rehydrated onions allows you to pretend you are back in a kitchen with a cellar full of harvest. You might also have a small tin of lime juice, thick and syrupy, which you ration out drop by drop, a sour treasure that you guard more closely than your poke of gold. The scarcity of fresh food creates a strange hierarchy in the camps. A man with a crate of eggs is a king. A man who managed to bring in a few shriveled lemons is a target of envy. You remember the stories of the oatmeal kings, men who lived on nothing but porridge to save every cent for their claims, their faces turning the colour of parchment as the winter wore on. You refuse to let that happen to you. You spend your evenings meticulously cleaning your small space, ensuring that not a single scrap of food is wasted. Even the water used to boil the beans is saved, used as a base for a thin soup the next day, enriched with whatever bits of bone or gristle you can find. As you eat your morning meal, sitting on a rough-hewn stool with your coat pulled tight around your shoulders, you reflect on the strange relationship you have developed with your sourdough. It is your constant companion, the only thing in this frozen landscape that seems to grow and change. You feed it a little more flour, a little more water, and it rewards you with that familiar, tangy rise. It is a cycle of life in a place that feels dominated by the stillness of death. The warmth of the flapjacks begins to spread through your chest, a small, glowing ember of energy that will have to last through hours of backbreaking labour in the permafrost. You realize then that the hunger is not just in your stomach. It is a hunger for the world of colour and light, the brown of the beans, the white of the flour, the grey of the salt pork. These are the colours of your survival, but they are wearying to the spirit. You find yourself looking at the moss on the rocks during the brief summer thaw with a strange intensity, wondering if it is edible, or watching the birds and wondering what their small, lean bodies might taste like if roasted over an open flame. This constant focus on the next meal, the next calorie, the next way to ward off the scurvy, strips away the layers of the person you used to be. You are no longer a man with complex tastes and preferences. You are a biological machine, calculating the cost of every movement against the meagre fuel in your belly. And yet, there is a certain pride in this endurance. You have learned to make a feast out of nothing, to find sustenance in the harshest environment on earth. As you scrape the last of the sourdough from your tin plate, you feel a grim satisfaction. Your body is lean, your muscles hard as the frozen ground you mine, and despite the monotony, you are still standing. You take one last sip of the bitter spruce tea, feeling the heat of it settle in your gut, and prepare to face the cold once more. The sourdough crock is tucked back into its warm corner, the yeast resting and waiting for tomorrow. A silent partner in your quest for fortune, and a humble reminder that even here, in the heart of the Klondike, life persists in the smallest, simplest of ways. The scent of the sourdough is soon replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of the frozen air as you step outside your cabin, your boots sinking into the thick, churned-up muck that has become the lifeblood of Dawson City. It is a strange, shifting landscape, a place where the earth itself seems to be in a constant state of upheaval, torn between the ancient stillness of the permafrost and the frantic, muddy energy of 10,000 men. You remember when this was nothing more than a swampy flat at the confluence of the Yukon and Klondike rivers, a quiet stretch of land where only a few tents fluttered like pale ghosts against the dark timber. But now, as you walk, the canvas has given way to wood. The city has grown upward and outward, a bustling metropolis of false-fronted buildings and boardwalks that groan under the weight of 1,000 desperate dreams. The mud is a living thing here, an ankle-deep slurry that clings to your heavy wool trousers and makes every step a deliberate, rhythmic effort. It defines the pace of the city, forcing a slow, measured gait even as the air around you vibrates with the frantic noise of saws, hammers, and the distant, muffled thud of the mines. You pass by a row of storefronts, and for a moment you stop to look at the hand-painted signs in the windows, your breath blooming in white clouds before your eyes. The prices listed there are enough to make your head spin, a stark reminder that in this frozen corner of the world, gold is often less valuable than the very things that keep you alive. You see a sign for eggs, $5 for a single dozen. In a world where a man back east might earn $1 for a full day of grueling labor, the cost of a simple breakfast here feels like a king's ransom. A single nail, a tiny bit of rusted iron, can cost more than its weight in silver, and a fresh head of cabbage is a luxury spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. You feel the weight of the small leather pouch in your pocket, the poke containing the dust you've bled and sweated for over the long months. It is heavy, pulling at your hip, yet you know how quickly it can vanish into the maw of the city's economy. Everything in Dawson is inflated, stretched to the breaking point by the sheer distance the goods must travel to reach you. Every crate of crackers, every barrel of flour, and every tin of coffee has been hauled over the harrowing mountain passes or dragged up the river on flatboats that risk the churning rapids. You understand now that the real fortune isn't always found in the bottom of a sluice box. It is found in the pockets of the merchants who arrived with nothing but a few sacks of salt and a sharp eye for the desperate. As you navigate the crowded boardwalks, avoiding the spray of mud from a passing horse-drawn wagon, you find yourself drawn toward the warmth and low hum of the saloon. It is more than just a place to wash away the grit of the mines with a glass of watered-down whiskey. It is the heart of the community, the unofficial town hall where news travels faster than the wind. You step through the heavy wooden doors, and the sudden wall of heat is a physical relief, smelling of tobacco smoke, damp wool, and the sweet, heavy scent of cedar sawdust scattered on the floor to soak up the filth. The light is dim, flickering from oil lamps that cast long dancing shadows against the walls, and the air is thick with the murmur of 100 voices, all speaking of claims, bedrock, and the elusive pay streak. In Dawson, the saloon often serves as the bank. You watch as a miner at the far end of the bar pulls out his poke and pours a small stream of gold dust into the brass pan of a scale. The bartender, a man with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, adjusts the weights with practiced fingers, his movements slow and methodical. There is a quiet tension in that moment. The clink of the weights, the soft rustle of the dust, the silent calculation of a man's worth. You realize that out here, currency is an abstract concept. Paper money is rare and often distrusted. It is the raw yellow metal that dictates the rhythm of life. You wait your turn, feeling the heat of the stove seep into your chilled bones, and you think about how this room represents the only stability you have. It is where you find out who has struck it rich and who has given up, where you hear about the arrival of the mail steamer, and where you can, for a brief hour, forget the crushing silence of the wilderness outside. The transition from the lonely, frozen creek to this crowded wooden hive is jarring, yet it is a necessary part of your survival. You look around at the faces framed by the lamplight, men from every corner of the globe, their skin weathered by the sun and scarred by the frost. There is a strange sort of equality in the mud of Dawson City. The son of a banker from New York stands shoulder to shoulder with a sailor from the South Seas, both of them covered in the same grey silt, both of them hungry for the same glimmering hope. You see the city growing around you, even as you sit there. The sound of a piano tinkling in the corner competes with the rhythmic thud of a new hotel being framed next door. It is a city built on a foundation of ice, a place that shouldn't exist, yet it pulses with a feverish, undeniable life. You finish your drink, the warmth of it spreading through your chest, and you prepare to step back out into the labyrinth of streets. The sun is low, casting a bruised purple light over the peaks that surround the valley, and the smoke from 1,000 chimneys rises in straight, unmoving columns into the darkening sky. You think of the nails you need for your sluice box, the flour you must ration, and the astronomical cost of simply existing in this place. The city is a beautiful, terrible machine designed to extract the gold from your pockets as efficiently as you extract it from the frozen ground. And yet, as you walk back toward your cabin, your boots heavy with the muck of the Klondike, you feel a strange sense of belonging. You are a part of this muddy metropolis, a single thread in the chaotic tapestry of the north. The boardwalk beneath you creaks, a rhythmic sound that matches the beating of your heart. You pass a store where a pair of boots is displayed in the window, priced at nearly $100, and you look down at your own worn, salt-stained footwear with a newfound appreciation. They have carried you this far, through the Chilkoot Pass, down the river, and into the heart of the goldfields. As the stars begin to prick through the cold velvet of the evening, you realize that while the prices in Dawson are high, the cost of the experience is something you cannot yet calculate. It is a debt paid in endurance, in the slow hardening of your hands and the deepening of your resolve. The city, with all its noise and its greed and its impossible expenses, is merely the stage upon which your own quiet drama unfolds. A drama of patience, of persistence, and of the long, slow wait for the spring thaw. You reach the edge of the town where the buildings thin out and the shadows of the forest begin to reclaim the land. The noise of the saloons fades into a distant hum, like the sound of a hive settling for the night. You take a deep breath, the cold air stinging your lungs, and you look back at the lights of Dawson, shimmering like a handful of spilled jewels against the dark belly of the valley. It is a fragile thing, this city, a temporary monument to human ambition, built on ground that never truly melts. But for tonight, it is your home. It is the place where your gold becomes bread, where your stories find an audience, and where the staggering cost of a single egg is simply the price you pay for the chance to be here at the edge of the world, chasing a dream that is as bright and as cold as the stars above. As you turn the key in your own humble door, the silence of the woods wraps around you once more. The economics of the city are left behind at the threshold, replaced by the simple, grounding reality of your own four walls. You set your poke on the table, the thud of it a solid, comforting sound in the quiet room. Tomorrow you will return to the mud and the frost, to the high prices and the crowded streets. But for now, there is only the slow settling of the embers in the stove and the steady, measured rhythm of your own breath as you prepare for sleep. The world outside may be frantic and expensive, but here, in the dim light of your cabin, peace is the one thing that costs you nothing at all. The metal latch of your heavy wooden door clicks into place, sealing the world away, but it cannot bar the entry of the deep, pervasive silence that defines a Yukon winter. By the middle of December, the concept of a day has shifted from a cycle of light and dark into a mere suggestion of grey. You wake in the pitch black, the air in your cabin so cold that your breath has formed a delicate, crystalline rime on the edge of your wool blanket. When you finally pull yourself from the warmth of your bedding, the floorboards greet your feet with a bite that feels almost like a burn. You move by touch, your fingers finding the familiar grooves of the matches and the rough surface of the stove. As the kindling catches, the first flicker of orange light dances across the logs of your walls, casting long, swaying shadows that seem to be the only other living things in the room. Outside, the sun has become a distant memory, a traveller who has moved on to kinder latitudes and left you behind. For weeks on end, the horizon offers nothing more than a few hours of bruised, violet twilight around midday. It is a strange, ethereal glimmer that never quite develops into true daylight. You find yourself standing at your small, thick-paned window, watching that faint smudge of blue-grey light as it hovers over the jagged peaks of the Ogilvy Mountains. It is a fleeting visitation, lasting perhaps 2 or 3 hours, before the ink-black curtain of night is drawn shut once again. During these brief windows of visibility, you might venture out to haul water or check your snares, but the world feels fragile and thin, as if the light itself is exhausted by the effort of reaching this far north. The physical labour of the sluice boxes has slowed to a crawl, replaced by the mental labour of enduring your own company. This is the time of the great isolation, a period when the miles of frozen wilderness between you and the rest of humanity seem to expand and solidify. The silence is not merely an absence of sound. It is a heavy, physical presence that sits in the corners of your cabin and settles on your shoulders. You begin to notice things you never saw in the frantic rush of the summer months. You study the grain of the wood in your table for hours, tracing the whorls and knots until they look like maps of forgotten islands. You listen to the expansion and contraction of the cabin's logs as the temperature drops to 40 below zero. A sound like a pistol shot that cracks through the stillness, making your heart leap in your chest. As the weeks stretch into months, the psychological toll of the dark begins to manifest in a restlessness that the old-timers call cabin fever. You might find yourself pacing the length of your floor, 10 feet one way, 12 feet the other, counting your steps until the numbers lose their meaning. The walls, once so protective and sturdy, can start to feel as though they are leaning inward, inching closer with every passing blizzard. You talk to yourself, at first just a few whispered words to hear a human voice, and then in longer, more rambling discourses about the gold you'll find in the spring, or the meal you'll eat when you finally return to a city with a proper restaurant. You find yourself cleaning your rifle for the 10th time in a week, or sharpening a knife that is already keen enough to shave with, just to give your hands a task that anchors you to the physical world. The isolation is a mirror, and in the deep Yukon winter, you are forced to look into it. Without the distraction of the shovel and the pan, your mind wanders back to the life you left behind. The warmth of a family kitchen, the smell of rain on hot pavement, the sound of a piano playing in a distant room. These memories are your treasures now, more valuable than the dust in your poke, but they are also sharp, cutting through your resolve when the wind howls particularly loud against the chimney. You learn to manage your thoughts like a guttering candle, shielding the flame of your sanity from the draughts of loneliness. You read the same 3 books until you know the cadence of every sentence, finding comfort in the predictable path of the words on the page. Yet for all the hardship and the heavy gloom, there are moments when the Yukon rewards your endurance with a spectacle that defies description. On the clearest, coldest nights, when the stars are so bright they seem to hum with electricity, the sky above your cabin transforms. You step outside, wrapped in every layer of fur and wool you own, and the air is so still it feels as though time itself has frozen solid. Then a pale green ribbon begins to unfurl across the zenith. It starts as a whisper of light, a ghostly curtain that shivers in a wind no man can feel. This is the aurora borealis, the northern lights, and as you watch, the green deepens, fringed with ribbons of violet and crimson that dance and swirl with a silent rhythmic grace. The lights ripple across the sky like silk caught in a current, casting a surreal, shimmering glow over the snow-covered valley. The white world around you turns to shades of emerald and lavender, and for a moment the crushing weight of the winter is lifted. You stand there, your breath blooming in white clouds before your face, feeling very small and very privileged. The hardship of the panning, the ache in your joints, and the long weeks of twilight seem like a fair price to pay for this view. The heavens are performing a private symphony for you and the handful of other souls scattered across this frozen waste, a reminder that there is beauty even in the most inhospitable corners of the earth. You watch until your toes go numb and the cold begins to seep through your heavy boots, but the image of that celestial fire stays with you long after you have retreated back to the warmth of your stove. You bank the fire for the night, the red glow of the coals reflecting the colors you saw in the sky. As you settle back into your bunk, the silence of the cabin no longer feels quite so heavy. It is a quiet of anticipation now. The dark is still long, and the spring is still many weeks away, but you have seen the light that lives in the heart of the winter. You close your eyes, the rhythm of your breathing slowing as you drift toward sleep, knowing that while the Yukon takes much from a man, it also gives him glimpses of a world that those in the crowded cities below will never truly understand. The snow continues to pile against your door, a soft white insulation that further muffles the world. You are a solitary spark in a vast, frozen wilderness, tucked away in a cocoon of wood and shadow. The gold is still there, buried beneath the permafrost, waiting for the sun to return and the ice to break. But for tonight, the search is paused. Your body, hardened by months of toil, finally finds its rest in the profound stillness of the north. The long dark is not an enemy, but a season of waiting, a time for the earth and the miner to gather their strength for the labor that lies ahead, when the first true light of spring finally touches the valley floor. The sound of the world waking up begins not with a bird's song, but with a low, visceral groan that vibrates through the floor of your cabin. It is the voice of the creek, muffled for months by several feet of solid ice, now beginning to fracture under the weight of a changing season. You step outside and the air no longer bites at your lungs with that crystalline, dry sharpness. Instead, it carries a heavy, damp scent of ancient mud and decaying pine needles. The transition is sudden. The white silence of the winter is being replaced by the roar of the spring freshet, a chaotic rush of meltwater that surges down from the high peaks, carrying with it the debris of 1,000 frozen miles. You stand on the muddy bank, watching the grey-blue water churn. It is a beautiful sight, but a terrifying one for a man whose entire fortune sits in a pile of dirt just a few feet from the rising tide. This is the moment you have worked for through the long, dark months of the subterranean winter. All that pay dirt you hauled up from the depths, bucket by agonizing bucket, now sits in a great, frozen mound near the mouth of your shaft. It is a heap of gravel and sand that looks like nothing more than common earth to the untrained eye, but you know better. Within that mound are the tiny, heavy flakes of gold that you have dreamt of every night while your muscles throbbed in the cold. The thaw is your greatest ally and your most dangerous enemy. You need the water to wash the gold, but too much of it will sweep your entire season's work into the Yukon River before you can catch a single grain. You feel the frantic energy in your limbs as you begin to shore up your sluice boxes. Your hands, calloused and mapped with dozens of small, half-healed scars, move quickly to reinforce the wooden flumes. You hammer at the riffles, ensuring the wooden slats are secure, for they are the only things standing between you and total loss. The water is rising an inch every hour now, a silty, freezing torrent that threatens to overtop the banks and turn your claim into a lake of slush. You begin the final wash. It is a physical marathon that makes the winter digging seem like child's play. You shovel the accumulated pay dirt into the rushing water of the sluice, your back bending and straightening in a rhythm that has become second nature. The cold water splashes against your wool trousers, soaking through to your skin, but you hardly feel the chill. Your focus is entirely on the flow. You watch the dark sand tumble over the riffles, the lighter quartz and granite being swept away by the current, while the heavier materials, the black sand and, hopefully, the gold, settle into the bottom of the box. The physical toll of these days is immense. You are working against the clock of the sun and the rising creek. You eat your meals standing up, hardtack and cold beans, hardly tasting them as you keep your eyes fixed on the sluice. There is a strange, feverish quality to the work. The exhaustion that has been accumulating in your marrow for 6 months seems to vanish, replaced by a nervous, electric tension. Every shovel of dirt is a gamble. Every hour of labor is a prayer. You find yourself talking to the creek, whispering to the water to stay within its bounds, to be gentle with your gold, to give back what you have spent your health to find. As the sun lingers longer in the sky, stretching the days into a hazy, golden twilight that never quite turns to true dark, you reach the bottom of your pile. The great mound of winter earth is gone, processed through the wood and iron of your machinery. Now comes the moment of reckoning. The roar of the Freshet is still loud in your ears, but the frantic pace of the shoveling has stopped. You shut off the diversion gate, slowing the flow of water through the sluice to a gentle trickle. The silence that follows is heavy, broken only by the drip of melting snow from the trees and the distant thunder of ice breaking up on the main river. You kneel by the first box. This is the clean-up. Your fingers, numb and wrinkled from the water, carefully lift the riffles. You begin to brush the concentrated sediment into a small pan. Your heart hammers against your ribs, a dull rhythmic thud that matches the pulsing in your tired feet. You swirl the pan with practiced ease, letting the water carry away the last of the worthless sand. And then, there it is. A dull, buttery yellow glint catches the pale spring light. It isn't the bright, polished gold of a jeweller's window. It is raw, heavy, and ancient. You see a small nugget, the size of a marrow-fat pea, rolling at the bottom of the pan, followed by a thick trail of fine, heavy dust. You touch it with your fingertip, feeling the incredible weight of it. Gold is so much heavier than the world around it. It sits in the pan with a stubborn, unmoving presence. In this moment, the exhaustion finally catches up to you. You sit back on your heels in the mud, the pan resting on your knees, and you look at the small pile of metal. You begin to do the mental arithmetic that every miner performs in the quiet hours of the spring. You think of the price of flour, the $1 a pound you paid during the winter shortage. You think of the new boots you need, the ones to replace the cracked, leaking leather currently bound to your feet with twine. You think of the debt you left behind in Seattle or San Francisco, and the cost of the steamship ticket that brought you to this frozen edge of the world. You realize then that the gold in your pan is not just money. It is a physical manifestation of the calories you burned, the sleep you lost, and the skin you left on the frozen handles of your pickaxe. It is a heavy, beautiful weight, but you wonder if it is enough to pay for the year of your life you have surrendered to the permafrost. You look at your hands, the knuckles swollen, the fingernails broken and stained with earth that no amount of scrubbing will ever truly remove. You have survived the Klondike winter, a feat that many who started the journey with you cannot claim. You have endured the isolation, the scurvy fears, and the crushing weight of the dark. And yet, as you stare at the gold, a strange sense of melancholy settles over you. The struggle was the thing that defined your days. For months, the gold was a ghost, a hope, a reason to get out of your bunk when the temperature was 50 below. Now that it is here, tangible and cold in your hand, the mystery is gone. It is replaced by the cold reality of the wash-up. You see the season's toil distilled into a few ounces of metal. It is enough to keep you going, perhaps enough to buy a few comforts, but it is not the mountain of wealth the newspapers promised back home. The realization sinks in slowly, like the silt settling in the creek. The North does not give gifts, it only engages in trade. It has taken your youth, your strength, and your comfort, and in return, it has given you these yellow grains and a story that no one who hasn't been here will ever truly understand. You feel an ache in your chest that has nothing to do with the cold. It is the realization that you are no longer the person who stepped off the boat at Skagway. That man is gone, buried under the snows of the Chilkoot Pass. You stand up, your joints popping like dry twigs. The sun is low on the horizon, painting the slushy landscape in shades of violet and bruised orange. You carry your gold back to the cabin, placing it in a small leather pouch that feels surprisingly heavy in your pocket. The roar of the spring freshet continues outside, a reminder that the earth is indifferent to your success or failure. The water will keep flowing, the ice will keep melting, and the mountains will remain, unmoved by the frantic scratching of the men in the valley. As you prepare your evening meal, the cabin feels different. The urgency is gone. The final wash is complete. You have survived the gamble. You stir the fire, watching the sparks fly up the chimney into the deepening twilight. You are tired, a deep soul-weary tiredness that a single night's sleep will not fix. But there is a quiet peace in the knowing. You know exactly what your life was worth this year. You know the price of your endurance. And as you lie down on your bunk, the sound of the rushing water outside becomes a lullaby, a chaotic, powerful song of a world that is finally, mercifully, beginning to thaw. The iron taste of the creek water lingers on your tongue long after the season has surrendered to time, a metallic ghost of the labor that defined your existence in the north. You look back at the valley from the crest of the ridge, and for the first time you see the marks you have left behind, not in gold, but in the very bones of the earth. The landscape is no longer the pristine, terrifying wilderness that greeted you when you first stepped off the boat at Skagway. It has been peeled back layer by layer, like a piece of fruit. The moss has been stripped away, the ancient permafrost exposed to the unblinking sun, and the creek beds have been rearranged into long, jagged rows of grey tailings. These mounds of washed stone are your signature, a testament to the thousands of times you lifted a shovel, the thousands of times you bent your back to the sluice box. They sit there still, bleached by the wind, looking like the vertebrae of some great, prehistoric beast that lay down and died in the mud. You realize then that you have changed the map of the world, even if only in this small, frozen corner. The forests have been thinned to feed the insatiable hunger of the steam thaws and the cabin hearths, leaving behind a stubble of stumps that poke through the snow like broken teeth. There is a profound heaviness in seeing the scars on the land, a realization that the gold you sought was tucked away in a vault of earth that had remained undisturbed for millions of years, only to be broken open by your desperate hands in a single, frantic decade. You feel the weight of your own boots on the path, and you wonder if the mountains will ever forgive the intrusion, or if they will simply wait, with the patient indifference of stone, for the rain and the silt to bury your efforts once again. As you walk away from the claim, you pass the ghosts of those who did not make it, their stories etched into the leaning crosses of the hillside cemeteries or left behind in the rotting canvas of abandoned tents. For every man like you who survived the winter and felt the weight of a few ounces of dust in his pocket, there were 10 more who left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a cough that would never truly leave their lungs. You remember the faces of the men you shared tobacco with, men who dreamt of mansions in San Francisco or orchards in the valley, but who found only the bitter reality of the poor man's diggings. Some of them threw their shovels into the brush in a fit of rage and walked toward the coast without looking back, their spirits broken by the sheer, monotonous cruelty of the frost. Others simply faded away, becoming part of the silence of the woods, their names forgotten by everyone but the families who still wait for letters that will never arrive. You think of the few, the legendary few, who struck the mother lode, those whose pans came up heavy with nuggets the size of walnuts, who became the kings of El Dorado and Bonanza Creeks. You saw them in Dawson, their pockets overflowing, buying rounds of champagne for a room full of strangers, their eyes wide with a manic, flickering light. But even for them, the gold often seemed like a burden, a strange sort of curse that alienated them from the very world they hoped to conquer. They are the exceptions that prove the rule of the Klondike, that the North gives nothing for free, and that what it takes is often more precious than what it yields. You are not one of the lucky ones, perhaps, but you are one of the standing ones. You have your health, mostly, and you have the hard-won knowledge of your own limits. You have endured the unendurable, and that is a wealth that no bank can hold and no thief can steal. The slow ache in your shoulders begins to soften as the distance between you and the sluice box grows. The repetitive rhythm of the work, the digging, the hauling, the rocking of the cradle starts to fade from your muscle memory, replaced by the steady, rhythmic pace of a man walking toward a different future. You find yourself noticing the smaller things now, the things you were too exhausted to appreciate when the gold fever was at its height. You see the way the sunlight catches the wings of a raven as it circles above the pines, its dark silhouette a sharp contrast against the pale, expansive sky. You hear the soft, muffled sound of your footfalls on the pine needles, a sound that is no longer drowned out by the roar of the water or the clatter of stones against wood. As the years pass in your mind's eye, you imagine the silence returning to the creeks. You see the cabins slowly collapsing under the weight of the winter snows, the logs turning soft and grey as the moss creeps back over the thresholds. The sluice boxes, once the centre of your universe, will eventually rot away, their iron nails rusting into the soil, leaving only a faint orange stain in the dirt. The willow thickets will grow tall and dense, choking the paths you carved with such effort, and the bears will return to the banks to fish where you once stood knee-deep in freezing silt. There is a deep, abiding comfort in this thought, the idea that the earth is reclaiming itself, smoothing over the jagged edges of your ambition with a blanket of green and gold leaves. You find a place to sit for a moment, resting your back against the rough bark of a cedar tree. The air is cool and smells of damp earth and coming rain, a clean, honest scent that clears the last of the wood smoke from your hair. You close your eyes, and the frantic energy of the gold rush feels like a dream you had a long time ago, a fever that broke in the middle of the night and left you wakeful and calm in the dawn. The world is very large, and you are very small, and in this realization there is a profound sense of relief. You no longer have to carry the weight of the mountain, you only have to carry yourself. The legacy you leave behind is not the gold you found, but the person you became in the process. You are a man who knows the song of the wind in the dark, who knows the precise temperature at which breath turns to ice, and who understands the quiet, holy value of a warm fire and a dry blanket. The Klondike has taken your youth and your ease, but it has given you a soul made of tempered steel, As you sit there, listening to the vast, humming stillness of the north, you feel a sense of completion. The panning is over, the fire is burning low, and the silence, when it finally comes, is not a void, but a fullness, a peaceful, echoing rest that stretches out across the valley, as deep and as timeless as the stars. The shadows lengthen across the forest floor, stretching out like long, dark fingers reaching for the coming night. You breathe in slowly, feeling the cool air fill your lungs, and you let out a long, shuddering sigh that releases the last of the day's tension. The journey was long, the work was hard, and the cold was a constant companion, but here at the end of the trail there is only the quiet. You are tired, yes, but it is the tiredness of a life fully lived, a body fully used. You lean your head back against the tree, and as the first faint star appears in the twilight above the Yukon, you let yourself drift, sinking into the soft, welcoming embrace of the earth you once fought so hard to conquer. The water continues to flow, the mountains continue to stand, and you are finally at peace.